Good morning, friends and peeps. This is the second edition of the Coffee and Pan Dulce, or as we've dubbed, Wired and Tired. Today we're going to talk about, well, we've been drinking coffee all morning and we're tired because we've been talking for an hour. But we're going to talk about the baseline income and Medicare for all and college for all, education for all. And one of the big things that a lot of the Democratic candidates for the presidency are running on is very progressive, very open funding of helping the baseline of America. You know, when you're talking about that we haven't had a minimum wage increase or livable wage passed and or increased in a long time, the fact that we have a $1.3 trillion student loan debt, and that we have people dying because they can't afford insulin. We definitely have some things to address in this country, and the baseline of those three human services to uplift the base of our country, the 85% bottom of the economy, to get the 15% to pay for some of it. And one of the suggestions is to do anywhere from a 1% to a 3% wealth tax and other mechanisms. In fact, I think Senator Warren is the one that's been proposing that. And to my left, of course, is Jeff Scott. He's going to be the counter against that. I'm obviously for it. Jenny Gunn. And what do you think about that? Well, I mean,
there's a lot here.
Yeah.
So we need to break it apart into little bitty pieces.
Where would you like to start?
Well, that's a good question. Because there are, let's say, I know, for example, that there are some people of the libertarian persuasion who are not, don't react strongly against the whole idea of universal basic income.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them, but I do know them and I do talk to them.
Yeah.
The question is, well, what's the purpose of it? And where does the money come from? So we don't just from the standpoint of most people and I would say this is probably true of a lot of conservatives too, but certainly a lot of people of the libertarian persuasion would say that they really have a moral issue with this right off the bat, that we can't just give income to people who are not doing anything. Now, it's one thing to say, we've got programs in place like Social Security, people have paid into the system, they're going to get an annuity, which is, a monthly payment, or they can actually get a lump sum and create their own annuity from it at a certain age. We've got a Medicare system where people have paid into this system, and then they're going to be able to get benefits from this. We've got things like unemployment insurance, which are done at the state level. So if you get a little patch of unemployment, depending on what the states do, you can get a little bit of income to tide you over a little bit. But for the most part, you have to have savings to get through that, right? So we don't like the idea of a society where people are not involved in the job market and the price system and working to better themselves and better their condition, trying to move ahead, and instead opt for something that doesn't ultimately pay the bills, but they get a certain income. So I do believe, I think that you can make a very solid case for saying we don't want to reward people who are idle, and then what are we going to condition it on? What if people are, spending it on drugs and they're sitting around watching television all day,
Well, and one of my problems with especially conservatives is this myth, and it is a myth, that it's attacking usually inner city people, urban people, that all welfare people are first of all inner city, probably people of color. So there's definitely a subset of racism there, where everybody that's on public assistance is an inner city drug user, and we're supporting gangs, we're supporting idleness and all that. But when we talk about Social Security for the seniors, we don't have that same conversation. And it's really weird how, or veterans benefits, for example. Let me finish.
Sure,
let me finish. I'll let you finish. Where the veterans, like my dad, for example, that's a retired officer, I mean, he did not become idle. He could have lived off his retired officer pay because he was 100% disabled. And he didn't say, well, I'm just going to lay around because I deserve to. He was 26 when he was wounded, and probably 27 when he officially got retired. And he did not. He could have just hung it up and pretty much lived off that, and still could. And he worked for another 3, almost 4 decades before he retired about 10 years ago. And so I don't believe that people are just going to lay up. In fact, I think it gives you a baseline to be able to go back to school and get training if you are typically a person that lives on the margins and makes that $8 to $11 an hour because your skill set's so low. I think it also helps small businesses that don't want to or can't afford to do a $15 an hour baseline livable wage, which we either need that or we're going to need a UBI. Because in every city in the United States, every major city in the United States, minimum wage, you can't even afford to live. You can't even afford to pay rent. You cannot afford to pay rent in Charlotte, North Carolina, in any part of the city on minimum wage. You cannot do it. It's almost like 55% of your income. And no apartment building is going to rent to you when your income, you can't exceed 30% of your income and rent a place. And so there is a definite, in this market forces that you're talking about, they haven't worked. Trickle down has failed this country. And so when you don't, it trickles down to a certain level, that top 15%, they may have the stocks and the bond investments, they have the 401k, they have the high profile jobs. But the groups that can't go back to school because they can't afford to go back to school and they don't want to take on $100,000 worth of debt, they get stuck. And they're stuck in a caste system. And so, I mean, one of the things that UBI would do is consolidate a lot of federal programs. And on a legit UBI, it would allow people to go back to school, especially in the 18 to 35 bracket. It would allow them to be able to balance life, and we wouldn't have to raise the minimum wage. So here's the other thing too, or catastrophically raise it to take it from 8 to 15, which is being suggested by Congress right now.
Right. So you're laying out a lot.
Yeah, and I want to just concentrate on UBI at first, and I think that in the last 40 years since Reagan, from 1981 till now. And I'm not laying it just on the Republicans, the Democrats have failed too, that the Congress and the President have not kept track or kept minimum wage, the bottom part of our society, because if minimum wage kept pace with CEO pay, as far as the percentage of increase, people would be paying about $32 an hour for minimum wage.
So you're talking about a lot of social ills, social ills, that you think will be resolved by this?
Quite a bit.
The first thing you said that I objected to, and you said a lot, but we're not having this conversation about Social Security, and that's really not true, because we are having the conversation about Social Security, because the Social Security system probably won't be there for the people that are paying into the system now, the young people, and so they know that it's on a little bit of a death spiral, and I'm concerned about that because I paid into the system and I expect to live a certain amount of time. So there are people talking about how we reform it to get it to work better, and there's really only 2 things you can do, and that's lower the benefits or extend the change the benefit schedule, right? And that's ultimately what they're going to have to do, because there's no way out of it. That's what happens when you run out of money in a program that wasn't set up to do that, right? So when it was set up, the mortality at the edge of mortality. People were dying at 65 when it was set up,
Right.
and now people are living much longer lives, and so the program hasn't adjusted to factor in the fact that people are going to be drawing this money down over 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. I don't know what else to address in you're thinking. So there's another aspect of it is you think it's going to take care of these other federal programs. Well, there's sort of zero evidence that these other federal programs would be collapsed if everyone was getting UBI. And would UBI really would it be a federal program, right? And so the states would shut down their unemployment benefits, or the states would shut down their defined contribution plans for the government workers. I mean, this would be such a radical remaking of society that first of all, I think the practical issue is one thing, which I think is daunting. But I also think that I don't think people are going to put up with that. I think that people are going to be fine with these fixes that we've got that are dedicated to specific needs, whether that's the needs of the elderly for retirement income, the needs of the elderly for health care benefits, the needs of the young for students and education, the needs of families for emergency welfare benefits and things like that. I don't think people are going to want to give up that patchwork of support that they get from generous taxpayers, and I say that word. I use that for, well, yeah, because I do believe that the American public is generous, and so it's not untrue. But I do believe that fear is exploited, and as you know, and I've said this on Coffee and Pan Dulce a couple times. I've certainly said this when I've been campaigning, which is that I'm not going to go out and be the guy that's attacking the welfare state, because I believe that there are people in our society that are in a state of literally perpetual emergency, and that happens to be homeless, veterans, people who are committing suicide, people who have mental health problems, and we do have this dystopian aspect of our society that we do actually have to fix. I am far more concerned about corporate welfare and about the military-industrial complex and the advantages that businesses get and the suppression of competition, the suppression of productivity.
So
and all
I want to
those
address
things.
that.
Okay, so let me wrap this point up,
Yeah,
because
go for it.
Because I see UBI as a little bit of a fairy tale about trying to replace this patchwork, which I think this patchwork doesn't work great, but it's not the worst thing in the world to have if you've got this sort of dystopian world that we're in right now. And that's why I don't actually fight it as much. I don't actually fight at whether it's a city or state level. When I say people suggesting, for example, medical clinics at a local level or some state-funded health benefits, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that would help on the margin,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
and all the stopgap programs, some of them, like Social Security and so many things, came out of the New Deal when we had a catastrophic economic downturn and our country blew apart at the seams, especially in the urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
But now, even more so, because we have become more urbanized, we have less people living in the rural areas than we have ever had in this country. That we are more urban centric, which also drives up the cost of housing when you centralize people into the top 50 or 100 cities in the United States. Your challenge is when you hog up a geographical area, it drives up rent, drives up mortgages, drives up property values in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah.
And so since developers and corporate America have not been responsible to the American worker and been held accountable for a lot of these problems, even here in the city of Charlotte. There has to be a universal program that addresses major issues such as not just homeless people that live on the streets that are the chronic homeless that typically had something that made their life spiral out of control. Like myself, I was homeless for 7 months in 2015, and I had a horrible personal tragedy that spun me out of control. And I rebounded because I had family and friends and had resources that pulled me out of the gutter. But a lot of people don't have that. But one of the things is the stopgap deals, like unemployment is a very temporary deal. Social Security, I do agree when they originally planned it, life expectancy was slightly lower than it is now.
Significantly lower.
Yeah, and also too, we have technology improvement, and so with technology improvement, which is also making us more urban, and it's caused a lot of growth has pain, and this country has grown economically since World War II. Right before World War II, we had the Social Security and all the New Deal stuff come in, and we've had this exponential growth, which has made us a very successful economically country. But we've not modernized our system. We've not modernized our infrastructure, such as healthcare, our education system, our training system, even how small businesses interact with people as far as wages. And we've not modernized our wage system. And one of the things with the UBI, or the Social Security for All, is like I like to call it, is that if you have a baseline amount of money that, and I've ran the numbers, and if you did a 1% on wealth, what was that for?
You ran the numbers?
I've ran the numbers on how to fund it, and it's a lot of lines of the way Elizabeth Warren is also suggesting it is on certain economic sectors. If you did a 1% universal tax, on a lot of transactions, a lot of different things, especially in high wealth individuals, the top 15%, it would fully fund a robust, strong UBI. The UBI also would allow for people that are chronically homeless or the underhoused. So you have a lot of millennials that are making those lower wages. They're living 4 to 8 people, adults, to a small home or apartment. You have a lot of people couch surfing. You have a lot of families that are underhoused. And I'll use an example in Amarillo, Texas, for example, a small school district like that, in just Amarillo ISD, and there's 11 school districts in that 2-county area, but the main one has 2,200 students between ages 6 and 18 homeless, in a city of 200,000 people. And so you have some significant issues when families cannot afford rent anymore and they're living in their grandmother's basement, or they're couch surfing on Aunt Martha's, sofa and guest bedroom and things of that nature. It's a broader problem than a lot of conservatives want to admit to. And we point to Skid Row in LA, and we say, oh, that's horrible and it's veterans. I'm like, no, it's not. There's a ton of youth. There's a ton of elderly. There's a ton of people that are living with their kids or their grandkids, and a lot of it's because we do not have a baseline. Because when you lift the whole baseline of 85% of people and lift them up to give them a better view of life, you also grow the economy. You also, those top 15% make more money off that by just doing a slight redistribution, and that, long-term sustainability wise, we have to do something. So we either have to adjust minimum wage to a level that nobody wants to do because we failed. We weren't transparent, and we weren't accountable for all these years, these last 40 years since Reagan won, and because of that, we do not have equity in the society.
Well, those are
that's a lot of points. I'm sorry, I rambled on a lot.
Yeah. So we need to, reduce this a little bit to so more manageable parts. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know where to start. I believe that productivity and economic growth. I've got a whole different theory about the way society works and the way that we're able to prosper. Taking money from one group and giving it to another group is not really a big part of the equation. It's one thing to say, that there are people who have an emergency situation. Teenagers need to couch surf sometimes, and I'm not making fun of that, because I too have been homeless in the past. Members of I don't want to talk about the stuff that we've all been through, or that we've all witnessed. We know that it's very difficult. We know that a lot of people on the street have mental health problems. We know that schools are expensive, healthcare is expensive. All the stuff that government is doing for us is really freaking expensive, right? So that should tell you one thing about what I believe, which is the government is really got to be the last resort, the absolute last resort when you're trying to somehow correct the ills of society. So that's just the big picture. Government should be the last resort, because I don't think that let's go like the wealth tax, for example. Well, if you're talking about all those SOB contractors who work around Washington, D.C., and who raise the price of homes in the D.C. area, the 5 counties around that, where they're really making big bucks, then I would say, sure. Let's cut their contracts, let's cut their salaries, let's shrink the size of government, let's force them to go into, move out of there, and make them become part of the productive sector rather than the parasitic Washington, D.C. sector. I say that's fine. But when you say, those people who work at Facebook, they're making $250,000, I think we need to tax them a lot and give their money to other people. I mean, these are young people at the height of their earning careers. That's a freaking good salary, even in California, right, in Silicon Valley. But they're paying out the nose California capital gains tax. I don't know if you're aware of this. If you're in North Carolina and you've got a portfolio of stocks, you're paying most of it to the federal government and very little to the state government. But in California taxes are extremely high, which is why millionaires tend to move out over time. It's why Donald Trump moved from New York to Florida, because he finds himself in a squeeze. So wealthy people will spend a lot of time protecting their money from governments that come after their money. Okay, so that's one reason why I think the wealth tax is kind of a non-starter.
Yeah, but I do believe, and this is the one thing, is that the wealthy, and I'm talking about primarily, I'm gonna interchange wealthy with corporate America. So
what about corporate government?
Yeah, well, in corporate government too. Yeah. So we've had a lot of failures, and for one, trickle down in economics or supply economics does not work, because it's.
Well, I have no idea what that even means. What do you hold in your mind as being supply side economics?
Well, supply side economics means if the top are successful, it'll trickle down to the bottom part of the economy. Well, that would be great if that actually happened in reality. In theory, it sounds amazing.
So no supply sider, Jude Wanniski, Arthur Laffer, Paul Craig Roberts, Bruce Bartlett, none of them ever said that.
Okay. What did they say?
Well, they said we need to take the shackles off of productivity. They enforced the supply side. I'm not a supply sider. I'm a both sider. I'm a supply sider and a demand sider. So there's no. It's a way that it's a marketing slogan for them to say the market is over-regulated. Now, a lot of this stuff was happening during the Carter years, right? Jimmy Carter was actually a fairly good president, and Edward Kennedy did some of his finest work during the late 70s too, on deregulating airlines, for example, and deregulating some other things, including craft beer. Billy Carter, remember? Mm-hmm. So this was the zeitgeist of the time. You know, the 70s were feeling like we are really feeling constrained here, and this group of people said, look, we can do two things. We can sort of optimize government revenue by not overtaxing people, reduce their marginal tax rates, take off some of the regulations and restrictions, and we can have more growth. Now that's, you know, again, I'm not here to defend supply siders because I'm not a supply sider, but I want to make sure we fairly recognize what their arguments are, right? We don't want to say that there's no rich people. I've never met a wealthy person that says, yeah, the fact that I'm really wealthy is going to trickle down to other people. But it's pretty clear that when people are managing their horses and their yachts and their big properties, that they literally are paying a lot of other workers. So the wealth of capitalists is what funds other people's jobs, okay? So,
yes.
So that's the way the capitalist system is supposed to be operating.
Right.
Right. So anyway, let me I just wanted to correct that because I don't like this misrepresentation of people who had very serious thoughts about the way that the world works, and the way that we have economic growth and the way that the division of labor and specialization work. Their views should not be misrepresented. Like
okay, that's fair. That's fair. But I do believe that we've looked to market forces to help the baseline of the economy. We need market solutions. Well, corporate America, high wealth individuals, corporate government has ignored that problem. I mean, when you talk about the people out there that are from 18 to 100 that are struggling and they've been ignored, and I'm talking about the low income people, the people that retired and depended on Social Security, depend on you know, some type of income that's livable. I mean, when you think back to the turn of the 20th century, when we had a huge disparity between the top 15% and the bottom 85%, we changed our laws to make economic prosperity for all, and a little bit of fairness. I mean, because we had a lot of robber baron, high wealth individuals, working people 70 and 80 hours a week with no due compensation. There was a lot of issues, a lot of monopoly issues, that sort of thing. We've kind of gotten back to that. I mean, when you have the manufacturer of insulin get a 8-digit bonus. And it's priced insulin so out of the market that you have people foregoing insulin and getting sick and passing away because they can't afford it. You do have a problem, and a chronic problem. And I know two people specifically that passed away for that situation.
Okay, so
in the last 10 years.
Look, I in this regard, I share views with some radical progressive economists who say that the patent system should be abolished, and the insulin is a perfect example of that because it's been evergreened, a lot of I want to make sure I get this figure wrong, but between I think 2000 and 2014, based on a recent book by Robin Feldman, who's at Hastings. She made the point that 75% of the new drugs were simply evergreening, right? Yeah. And that just means you're changing the dosage, you're changing the time, you're adding a buffer, so you're just taking some other, chemical, molecular structure or a biologic, and you're just evergreening it, right? And that's what creates the massive margins for pharma to be able to bribe and cajole pharmacists and doctors to make sure that people don't get the low-cost insulin.
Right.
Okay. So that's why I believe we should abolish patents. We should start with drugs and then perhaps move on to other things. But even Dan Bishop had the courtesy to talk about this because it was in Tillis's domain there for a while. They had Senate hearings on it, and Bishop actually said something about this that was quoted in the Observer. He said, yeah, we need to look at that. We need to look at that, so he's on record as saying, yeah, we should shrink it. So once you get to the point where you're saying, okay, these periods are too long, where they've got a monopoly and they can rake all this dough in, and they can literally bribe people and get away with it. When you start thinking about shrinking it, there's no way you can stop halfway. You go to zero. You just say, no, we need a better model for funding research and then for putting this stuff out. And so again, I would be open to the idea of it being a public utility. So I'm violating some libertarian norms here today.
And we're talking about medical, the medical.
We're just talking about medical.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there is a case that progressive economists make about the utility of public research and public research money, so that these drugs can be made available. So if you want to go into the high profits of banks and other institutions, well, the show's going to be like 4 hours. I'm happy to do that.
Right. Yeah.
I do think that people with assets are reaping a lot of large benefits right now. Most people don't have savings, and most people can't. If they had a $500 medical bill, they couldn't pay for it. They'd have to take out credit to pay for it. So people are living. Members of my family are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, so a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. That is a total disaster. So I don't like this economy.
Right.
I don't like it either. But I think that sort of going after wealthy people is misguided. I think you need to go after the causes of why people with assets are benefiting so much more than workers who are going out for income. And I think the solution to that is looking at the banking system a little closer.
Well, and I think and to your point, and I say this over and over again, I think you need personal responsibility, governmental responsibility, and corporate responsibility, or private sector responsibility. And when we don't look out for each other, and we've in a part, as a society, we've ignored these problems for far too long. I mean, homelessness is not a new thing. People living beyond or below a livable income and retiring in poverty. I mean, maybe because they're so broken down, and by they get to a certain age, because they did do such hard work. And the average retiree retires with $700 in a bank. 70% of them do. Right. And so there's a significant amount of poverty in the retiree community. And you hear the stories of retirees eating cat food because it's cheaper. Buying animal pharmaceuticals because it's cheaper.
I'm intimately familiar with this problem, because I consider myself semi-retired right now.
Right.
So I'm trying to manage my assets in such a way so that I don't have to be, eating cat food later down the line. But we are going to have this very serious retirement crisis. People don't have savings. Even the people that do savings have, maybe enough for 2 or 3 years. Something on the order of less than 100,000.
Yeah.
So the median savings for retirees, I think it's zero.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people have an expectation that they're gonna, let's face it, a lot of people do look at their home and they've invested a lot in real estate, so that doesn't show up on their savings. That doesn't show up on their it doesn't show up in their savings, but a lot of people are expecting their house is going to appreciate, and then they're going to downsize, and everybody's hoping to sell their house at the top of the market when they need to
that real
retire.
estate nest egg that may or may not happen. I think there's multiple issues. I mean, one, that this country does not value education in so many different ways. Not only in training and education to better the people, but also too financial education and understanding for the people that can save, that maybe should have saved, and understanding deals,
Right.
there's a big failure in that part.
Right.
And-
I don't disagree with that, but can I interject something? Because I know you want to talk about education here, and
Right.
this is something that is bugging me, and it happens to do with there's another part of the market which I'm discovering just over the last couple of years, which is like I just said, I'm semi-retired, and I'm still on LinkedIn. I'm still getting calls from recruiters, but they want me to come up there and sort of bust my butt, right?
Right.
At least 40 hours a week, probably closer to 50. And, it's the good money that I was used to making, and I'm fine with it. But I don't want to do that anymore.
Right.
I could do 20 hours. I could do a couple of days. I could do Mondays and Fridays, or I could do Tuesdays and Wednesdays and part of their, they are not flexible enough. The labor contracts in these large institutions with people with backgrounds like mine can't. I mean, it's like you're either here 50 hours a week and you're busting your butt and you're, doing what you need to do to survive in that very vicious corporate environment, or you're just going home,
Yeah.
right? And so it's very binary. You're either there, pedal to the metal, or you're home. There's no halfway for me.
And I think too, though, in when you're talking about flex time and stuff like that, which technology companies tend to embrace more
Yeah.
than the old school industries like banking, for example, that's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of companies like Microsoft, for example, use a very flex time schedule, do a lot of work from home. They do a lot of things that technology is allowed for.
Yeah.
And so we have this weird Jekyll and Hyde existence.
Jekyll and
Hyde. Did I say Heckle and Hyde? Yeah.
Heckle and jive.
We are wired and tired, but one of the issues is that we have not used modern technology to our benefit and new ideals. And I think the overall issue when you talk about UBI, schools, education, all this is that we're still trying to apply a 19th century model to 21st century problems. And if we had more flex time jobs for people that are semi-retired, and I think one of the issues is that a lot of people that have a higher skill set, such as yourself, that can go into that sector, you've gotten to a level that you're like, I'm comfortable, I'm positioning myself, I wouldn't mind working 20 hours a week and also imparting my wisdom and imparting my experience, which is of value for these organizations. But they still, even though they're run probably by younger people, don't have the mentality of flexibility because it's what we've always done. And I think the same thing can be said by Social Security, Medicare, and educational systems. We're still using 19th and 20th century models for all these systems, but because cost of living has gone so exponentially high, it's a product of our success. We're also victims of our success. That all these need to be readdressed with new sets of eyes. And I think when you have Medicare for all or medical deal, the technology's driven the prices of so many things up. I mean, because we are extending people's lives, that's expensive. I mean, that's expensive to do these new microsurgeries and all this stuff.
That's true, but innovation and productivity lead to lower prices. In a normal functioning world, productivity leads to lower prices, right? That means that if I'm more productive, I've got a better technology to do the same thing I was doing 5 years ago, much cheaper now. That lowers
in certain markets. In certain markets, not all.
In markets in general, I mean, it's an interesting case when you find places. It's certainly the case that if there's an innovation and it's the one thing, it's the Buffett pill that will keep Warren Buffett alive for 20 years, and you've invented it, right? But it only works on Warren Buffett, right? That's going to cost a lot,
right?
But no one else wants it,
right?
And so you're not going to be mass producing it. It's not going to. So it's true that there are some things that are technological innovations that are they're going to cost a lot at first, right? But over time, as you produce these things and they become more widespread, I mean, it's true. Rich people get all the cool stuff first. That's always been the case. It will always be the case.
But there's also I mean, there's several points there, but one of them is real estate, for example, bucks that trend. So as you get a concentrated population, it always drives the price of the average cost of rent / mortgage payment, housing payment up. I mean, we can use every city in America. I mean, Austin, Texas used to be super affordable. It was this sleepy little central Texas city.
Detroit,
Detroit was a monumental collapse. So
that's right.
To get that price to come down, you have to collapse in all the cities.
That's right. So not the point is not every city is a boom. I mean, Detroit had the highest per capita income in the country in the early '60s.
Correct.
And it collapsed. So cities,
but that actually proves my point.
Live and they die, right? So it's very cheap. It's so cheap to buy property in Greater Detroit that they're returning parts of Michigan to forest.
Yeah, but also too you're talking about that's not a sustainable model. In fact, lack of sustainability is what collapsed that city. In that greater area. I mean, Michigan has had a tough time. So has Indiana because of the auto industry, the domestic auto industry failing.
That's right.
So that isn't applicable to other cities from the fact that your suggestion would be is to implode all your cities.
The point
to drive
is
the price down.
The people that leave those cities
right.
when they're failing cities, they come to successful cities. So
Correct.
Prices are going up here because people want to be here.
Correct.
Right.
So we're a victim of our own success.
That's right. So a lot of people are making money hand over fist. People with assets, Certainly. People who bought in early, people who are, taking advantage of the larger population, builders, construction workers. This is a boom time. It's not going to last forever.
No.
So I guess the point of that is simply that cities live and die. We've got we've got problems, which is really more of an embarrassment of riches, right? Because people want to be there. It's better than where they came from. So even though rents are high and they're going up and it's unaffordable, and I know I got a 19-year-old daughter and she's got friends and they can't find places to live, and then wherever they, it's very expensive. So I know it's very tough. But I can tell you, I went through the exact same thing. Right? Whether it was in California, in the early 80s, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, those were very, very expensive coastal towns, and that was a big boom time. Everybody wanted to be there, and it was hard. And I was living in a garage, So this is kind of a rite of passage for a lot of young people who are trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, who are not on a college path.
Except for, here's the problem.
Well, I'm trying to get it back to the UBI thing.
Right.
But go ahead and make your point. I didn't mean to interrupt.
The whole point there is different when we grew up, and I don't know how old you are, but I know how old I am.
I'm 29.
29 and old. So am I. That is so weird.
Isn't that
what
funny?
A coinkadink. But when we grew up, college was extraordinarily affordable.
Yeah.
Minimum wage, you could still live on it. You could live on it. It wasn't extravagant, but it was not. It wasn't like mind-boggling impossible like it is now.
I earned a minimum wage, and it was $1.65 an hour.
Correct. Wow. I was okay. So I'm a little younger than you are. But the whole point was there was a time when minimum wage was survivable. Right now, it's not. It's not even close.
That's true, but we don't even know what the prevailing wage is because, like, I know an economics teacher. I ran into her about 4 or 5 weeks ago. She teaches this to her students, right? And she said, everybody know what the minimum wage is? And they all looked around. I think it's what, $7 or something like that. $7.85. And she said, raise your hand if you make $7.85. And no one raised their hand. She said, raise your hand if you make more than $7.85, and everybody raised their hand. So
But it could be not much more. I mean. So if you make $8 or $9 an hour.
The point is that no one's got a right to a specific wage. They've got a right to a competitive wage based on the employer's perception of their productivity.
Well, but that's not completely true. So if you see your top wage earners that control the market are going catastrophically higher, but you're not seeing them offer that same opportunity to lower wage workers, but yet they're making those huge bonuses and those huge salaries off the sweat of the bottom 85%. And there's no governmental responsibility that steps in and says, well, okay, there's such a disparity that we have to raise the bar a little bit and throw us a few people a bone. That is a failure, a lack of good governance, because if you don't have a shot at that job, because that...
I understand the problem that you're getting at, right? So
right.
Corporate management gets paid a lot more than their workers, and the ratio of their
changed
pay
a lot in 40 years.
Has changed a lot. And there are serious problems in corporate governance, the way that corporations work, the way that they extend the way they extend benefits to their workers. I don't believe that in what I consider sort of the Marxist model of productivity, that there's a bunch of people out there working minimum wage and the people at the top are making money based off the sweat of these workers, right?
But they do.
So that's not what capitalism is. That's a purely Marxist view of productivity, and it's just false. Because in order to be able to pay wages...
Well, I love how you paint my opinion as Marxist.
No.
Because when I said something about the supply side, you cracked me over the head. So one thing I want to say...
Well, that's what the show's about. Tired and wired.
Tired and wired.
If we're not cracking each other over the head, why would you even be watching?
I love how we use
watch this?
Dog whistle words in arguments about socialism. And Marxist invokes communism a lot of times
that's true. That was a tired and wired
faux pas.
And let me pull it back a little bit and say that I've got a different view of what makes countries productive. My view goes back to the wealth of nations. And it's simply the division of labor and specializations. Some people know more than other people. Some people accumulate capital, and in order to grow their business, they're able to pay wages to workers to contribute to that. So I don't believe in the exploitation theory of labor. I do believe that some people may feel put upon, they may be angry, they may feel exploited, but I don't believe in the exploitation theory of labor. I do believe that corporations, and I wish Alan Smith were here so we could talk about how evil corporations are.
And I'm not saying that they're evil, but when you have wage suppression and a lack of collective bargaining across the table, and you don't have any kind of outlet to defend the common worker, the people that make between $8 and $15 an hour, that bottom 15-20% of productivity, that's the majority of a lot of Americans. You have a very serious issue because who's their voice? Well, it's not been the government, because they haven't raised minimum wage to any acceptable level in a long time. Corporate America ain't gonna voluntarily give that out, because CEO salaries compared to the bottom income deal used to be a gap of about 300% in the 1980s. It's a little over 3,000% now. So it's grown tenfold. But minimum wage has not grown tenfold. And so when you have the people at the top making all these decisions and controlling that spigot, so to speak, well, they're going to only benefit themselves. They're human. I mean, if I was at the top, if I was the CEO of Wells Fargo, a bank that I bank with here in town, and I was the boss, I'm not saying I would do anything different, but that's why you have to have one entity that says, wow, Hoss, pump your brakes a little bit. You just paid yourself an 8-figure bonus.
Right.
And it's across. It's more than just big pharma that's doing this. It's a whole bunch of companies. I'd say the top 500 companies that are doing this. So when you see that lack of corporate and high wealth responsibility, to where they're saying, okay, we probably do need to throw people a little bit of a bone, and they're not holding themselves accountable, then I do think that your third party or in between has to be either unions and or government, and being able to collectively negotiate and say, this isn't right. This isn't right.
Okay, so this is, we're coming to the end here, right? We've only got a couple of minutes. For me, the conversation is really kind of whack-a-mole, right? So the last part of it is, corporations are evil. The people that are running. Well, okay. So the people
they don't have oversight. They don't have a check and balance.
Well, let me make this my final thoughts, and I'll let
Go for it.
You'll have the last point. But we are playing a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole because these issues pop up, and it's difficult to focus on one long enough to resolve it before we get to the other one, and before we can summarize what we've said. So. With corporations and people at the top, you're right, they're just doing what comes naturally, which is benefiting themselves, which is why we need a very robust competitive world market in management, because that would drive the prices down. So just like why are doctors expensive? Because we don't have enough of them. We need to bring more of them in. Why do these rich SOBs at the top of the food chain in the corporations, why are they making gazillions of dollars? Well, there's not a lot of competition, right? So maybe we need to bring in someone who can compete with, Jamie Dimon or whoever.
Sure.
So the market for corporate control was squelched by the government starting in the late 80s. That's a whole separate topic, and it's actually fairly fascinating.
Yes,
and
I'd love to do a show on that.
Yeah. But UBI, just to go back to the first part that we were talking about is. For me and most libertarians, most social conservatives, many liberals too, many Democrats. So this is not really that much of a partisan issue in that regard, because there's a large movement against this who don't like the idea of it. There's a lot of young people that say, yeah, I could certainly use $1,000 a month, and I think I tweeted out in my Joker costume from last week. I tweeted out that I was going to give out $2,000 a month, not $1,000. So I'm the guy for you. Vote for me. $2,000 a month.
Well, and I think too. In all seriousness, I think that we have a bunch of social, economic ills in this country that we've definitely ignored, and that the people at the top with the wealth and the power have, and on both sides. I think it is a nonpartisan issue from the fact that both major parties have failed us on this tragically, and only use it for political reasons. Like the democratically controlled House, for example, this fall proposed the $15 an hour thing. But they did it in such a skeezy way, that it was just a self-promotion deal, because they knew the Senate would never hear for this. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a political move, and as far as market competition, I'm all for competition. I think in some cases, and in probably most cases, competition can drive down prices. Not all. In housing, that's not true. There are several other markets that's not true. Just because of the way, the dynamic of real estate, for example. But to get to the main point is that the UBI, the Education for All, and the Medicare for All, is that we need some Band-Aids right now while people are bleeding out. Our lower part of our society is bleeding out. And just like in the New Deal, when society was bleeding out, it's kind of time. We need to do the Band-Aids, build from that. And I think having a few stopgaps before we wrangle for decades over how to do it long term, we have to put a few things in play and fully fund them, and get moving on helping the lower part of America, economically speaking.
Thanks for listening to Tired and Wired.
Woo! I'm wired. There's tired.
We need music.
Woo!
We need
Have a good day.
We need some
Have
show
a good
tunes.
day. Yeah, I feel pretty.